Conflicts that shaped Pharaonic Egypt. Lecture 9. The King as Son, the Son as King. The Amarna period of the late 18th Dynasty.
Enjoying the prestige and wealth brought to Egypt as the result of the military success of the warrior kings Thutmose I and Thutmose III, the rulers of the middle portion of the 18th Dynasty were able to indulge in feats of sporting prowess and luxuriate in the refinements of a wealthy and culturally sophisticated court. The pinnacle of this opulent period is the reign of Amenhotep III. Aside from 2 campaigns in Nubia, the relative lack of bellicose necessities allowed Amenhotep III to seek new ways of manifesting royal authority. During his 30th regnal year, he found a way to exceed his predecessors, at the same time, probably unwittingly setting in motion events that would lead to the coming Amarna revolution. When an Egyptian ruler reached his 30th year on the throne, he could celebrate a festival we call the Jubilee, a festival the ancient Egyptians termed Hebsed, Festival of the Tail, apparently referring to the bull's tail worn from the rear of the king's kilt as one of the emblems of royalty in Egypt. This Festival of the Tail was a renewal of the royal person, a reaffirmation of his rule. Already in evidence in the imagery of the late Naqada II period, already visible iconographically from before 3250 BCE, the festival is celebrated by Narmer, the first ruler of unified Egypt. A ruler could celebrate additional jubilees following his 30th regnal year. He could celebrate more frequent jubilees later in his reign. Whereas early 18th Dynasty kings transformed ritual into history through their military campaigns and physical exhibitions of royal power, Amenhotep III attempted to transform history itself into a series of ritual events. The royal display of physical power in the imminent mortal world, the campaigning of Thutmose III, the feats of sporting prowess of Amenhotep II, gave rise during the reign of Amenhotep III, specifically during the first Jubilee of Amenhotep III, to a desire to display the immortal transcendental power of the king while he was still amongst the living. Amenhotep III sought out documents within temple libraries that would tell him how to celebrate his Jubilee in the same way as the semi-divine rulers of remote antiquity. Descriptions of Amenhotep's first Jubilee in the tomb of Haruef, the chief royal steward of Amenhotep III, describe the results of this antiquarian research. It was His Majesty who did this in accordance with the writings of old. Past generations of people since the time of the ancestors never celebrated such rites of the Jubilee. It was for the one appearing in truth, the son of Amen, that being Amenhotep III, who enjoys the legacy of his father given life like Re forever that it was decreed. Depictions in the tomb of Haruef allow one to reconstruct the key events of 2 of Amenhotep III's Jubilees. Physical remains of these Jubilees also survive in the form of the great festival city of Malkata, which Amenhotep III constructed as an enormous stage for his Jubilees at the southern end of the Theban West Bank. At the site of Malkata, just south and west of his mortuary temple, Amenhotep III ordered the construction of his Jubilee city. The mortuary temple and Jubilee city were constructed to either side of an earlier temple to Amun, Holy of Place, a site now known as Medinat Habu. The significance of the concentration of Amenhotep III's building activity on the region of Medinat Habu, mortuary temple just to the north, festival city just to the south, becomes apparent when seen in the light of his son's new capital city, We'll discuss this in the next lecture. House of Rejoicing was the name of one of the palaces of Amenhotep III's new city at Malkata, a name emphasizing the solar nature of Amenhotep III's jubilee. The ritual celebrated at Malkata transformed the pharaoh into the sun god himself. The term rejoicing in the name of Malkata does not simply refer to the celebrations, but also to the action of the solar god. Each time the sun rose, the Egyptians believed that Re rejoiced in the horizon, Ha'am Achat. Malkata symbolized the horizon, and Amenhotep III, who took for himself the epithet dazzling sun disk, was able to rejoice in his own horizon as he celebrated his Jubilee festival on the West Bank, near the western horizon. The term for sun disk, appearing in Amenhotep III's epithet dazzling sun disk, Iten Chehen, the term Aten, is the normal word for the visible manifestation of the sun god in Egyptian texts. The importance that Amenhotep III placed on that form of the sun god, the physical disk of the sun that we see, and his own acting out of the transformation into the solar deity in the course of his Jubilee festival, presaged the religious revolution of his successor Akhenaten, who promoted the Aten to be the most important and indeed only deity of the Egyptian pantheon. East of the Jubilee city was a major element of the Malkata complex and the only one that is greatly visible today, a great T-shaped harbor now known as the Birket Habu. According to the map that appeared in the publication of the work of the Napoleonic expedition, there may have been an East Bank counterpart at one point, although it is now virtually invisible on the ground. After the first Jubilee festival, the western harbor was enlarged to a length on the long sides of more than 2 kilometers, necessitating the dismantling of some of the earlier buildings at Malkata. The 2 lakes and the canals connecting them to the Nile figure prominently in the unique and archaic Jubilee celebrations of Amenhotep III. According to texts in the tomb of Kheruef, the royal courtiers participating in the festival took hold of the tow ropes of actual vessels, representing the boats of the day and the night sun, with the pharaoh actually sailing in those model solar boats. Kheruef says, quote, "They were directed to the harbor of his majesty to row in the bark of the king. They grasped the tow ropes of the evening bark and the prow rope of the morning bark, and they towed the barks at the great place, the palace. They stopped at the steps of the throne." Now, in Egyptian theology, Re traveled in the day bark from dawn until sunset, transferred to the night bark, and sailed therein from sunset until dawn. In the western and eastern horizons, the day bark and the night bark met prow to prow, and Re moved from one to the other as he rejoiced in the horizon. In certain of the Netherworld books recorded on the walls of the tombs of the kings in the Valley of the Kings, the solar barks also serve as the means by which the king's soul travels through heaven and the underworld in his eternal afterlife. During his Jubilee festival, patterned on the Jubilee festivals of old, Amenhotep III reenacted this journey of the sun god, sailing in the day and night barks on the Nile and in his artificial lakes, transferring from one boat to the other, literally sailing out of the western desert into the eastern desert, and vice versa, literally sailing in and out of both horizons, just as did Re in the heavens each day. One might expect the king to travel in the day bark, acting as the visible sun disk. But more surprising is Amenhotep III's trip in the night bark, which mirrored the sun's own nightly revivification in the bowels of the underworld. In staging his own solar regeneration on the waters of the Nile, Amenhotep III, this dazzling visible disk of the sun, appears to have signaled his own rebirth as a full deity on earth, and also to have proclaimed the birth of a new solar regime for Egypt and her empire. Amenhotep III has literally staged his death and resurrection in his Jubilee. We know from the standard pharaonic Jubilee scenes that boats do not appear to have played a great role in later celebrations of the Jubilee. But in that earliest Jubilee imagery, from the late 4th millennium BCE, boats are perhaps the most prominent elements of the Jubilee festival. Apparently, Amenhotep III really did engage in antiquarian research, and apparently this sailing in the boats really is part of his attempt to go back to a more archaic form of the Jubilee. After 38 years of rule, Amenhotep III died in the more accepted mortal fashion and was succeeded by a son, also named Amenhotep, who would later change his name to Akhenaten. With Akhenaten, we go from the king as solar disk under Amenhotep III to the solar disk and the children of the solar disk as rulers in Egypt. The pharaoh Amenhotep IV began his reign with the same name as his father. For the first 5 years of his reign, he rules from Thebes. By regnal year 6, Amenhotep IV, now calling himself Akhenaten, had moved to a new capital city in Middle Egypt that would remain the center of a new cult, the cult of the physical disk of the sun, the Aten, right up until the end of Akhenaten's 17-year reign. Already before the final move from Thebes to Akhenaten, the new king began to promulgate a new religion. The apparently exclusive worship of the light of the sun as manifest in the glowing disk of the visible sun, the Aten. Akhenaten is now perhaps best known as something he was not, a monotheist. Modern representations of Akhenaten as a prophet, a worshiper of a sole deity before his time, stem from a misunderstanding of Egyptian religion in general, and of Akhenaten's own version of solar worship in particular. Although Egyptian religion, with its abundance of deities, gives evidence of what we would term polytheism, the belief in a multiplicity of deities, this polytheism does not stress the division, the plurality of divinity. Instead, New Kingdom Egyptian theological interpretation increasingly stresses a concept of divine unity. The many deities of Egypt are the maximum differentiation in the ordered world of a primordial oneness. They are the balanced pairs of creation, the periodic table of divine elements. Polytheism in Egypt is not a constant cosmic state, but a stage or level of cosmic development. In Egypt, polytheism is the splitting apart of the primordial oneness into all the possible multiplicity of balanced pairs in the ordered world. As night descends, as the sun dies each day, the cosmos goes back into the state of oneness. Isafet conquers Ma'at, disorder, entropy overtake order and progress, and at that moment of recombining, of oneness, the singularity is achieved again, whereby the power of chaos against creation ceases to exist because creation no longer exists in order to have the balanced pair of chaos. Now, all of the power that exists in this oneness becomes the potential for recreation. Therefore, for the Egyptians, polytheism, the ordered world, all of these things are but the maximum manifestation into Ma'at, into the plurality of balanced pairs, of a oneness that is always there, and of a oneness that provides ultimately the potential for recreation. The ancient world gives evidence of two sorts of monotheism: a political monotheism that says our deity is superior to your deity, and a cosmological monotheism, saying that our deity, or at least some deity, is the only deity. Akhenaten indeed appears to worship a single universal deity, the solar visible disk Aten. Four basic features of Akhenaten's worship lead to the conclusion that Aten is alone because he exists at a time before the creation of the cloud of polytheistic deities the Egyptians normally worship in the ordered world. Akhenaten is not the priest of a sole god Aten because other deities do not exist. Aten is sole god for Akhenaten because other deities do not yet exist. Polytheistic deities manifest a period of cosmic development, a late stage of cosmic development. A monotheistic deity in Egypt belongs to a time when the cosmos is new and not yet differentiated. Since the religious revolution of Akhenaten is the focus of his reign, a proper understanding of the main features of his theology is essential to understanding other events of his reign, including foreign policy. During the first 5 years of his reign, Amenhotep IV instituted an extensive building program at the Temple of Amun at Karnak. The earlier structures there were dedicated to Amun, his consort Mut, and the child god Khonsu. One of Amenhotep IV's few contributions to the main temple was the addition of a porch before the third pylon, decorated with images of the pharaoh smiting his foes. Akhenaten was not a pacifist, either as Amenhotep IV or, we shall see, as Akhenaten. However, the 4 freestanding temples that Amenhotep IV built as part of the Karnak complex were dedicated to the solar gods Ra-Harakhti and Aten. The first art under Amenhotep IV depicts the falcon-headed god Ra-Harakhti as Horus of the horizon, using the traditional artistic style. The primary theological innovation early on is the addition of the epithet "who rejoices in the horizon" to the name of Ra-Harakhti. But these traditional images, before long, give way to an entirely different depiction of the sun god as the disk itself. Akhenaten most often represents Aten as a hemisphere in deeply sunk relief with many rays extending down and out and ending in small human hands. Most often these hands hold signs of life to the noses of the royal family. But in at least one scene, the Aten holds out a choice of weapons to the militaristic Akhenaten. Atenism was not equal to pacifism. The fact that the rays end in hands tells us something about Egyptian religion. The term for rays, setut, is feminine. The word for hand, jeret, is also feminine. So the rays of the sun, the ways in which the sun reaches the earth, the way the sun impacts life on earth, can be envisaged as ending in hands, the ways the solar deity might act on earth. Since these are feminine elements, they may both describe the same theological concept of the physical reality of the light of the sun reaching the earth. Now, if Akhenaten built 4 temples around Karnak that quickly, he must have had a different construction style than his predecessors, and indeed he did. Rather than using the massive blocks of stone at which the ancient Egyptians were so adept at quarrying, transporting, and setting in place, Akhenaten employs a much smaller type of stone, very small, roughly 52 by 26 by 24 centimeters. Egyptologists call these by the Arabic talatat, apparently derived from the term for 3 because they're approximately 3 palms in length. The Egyptians themselves recognized that these were fairly Lilliputian stones compared to what they were used to dealing with, and called them stone bricks. Amenhotep IV celebrated a jubilee, probably in his second or fourth year. That's quite remarkable. That doesn't make any sense. That's early for anyone. But as Amenhotep III died in his 38th regnal year, Akhenaten's jubilee would correspond to the 40th or 42nd year of his father's reign. Either one an appropriate time for Amenhotep III to celebrate a jubilee. By celebrating a jubilee early in his reign, Amenhotep IV is telling us that there is a complete continuity with the reign of Amenhotep III. The jubilee time of Amenhotep III still exists. The timelessness into which a pharaoh's reign seems to have slipped after that first jubilee has not ended with the physical death of Amenhotep III. The credo of Akhenaten's religion appears in the so-called didactic name of the god Aten. This name is written in two cartouches as though it were the two common names, prenomen and nomen, of a king. The first name of the Aten, used until the 9th regnal year of Akhenaten, was, quote, the living one, Re Horakti, who rejoices in the horizon. There's that Ha'imachet again. In his identity of light, Shu, luminous space, which is in the sun disk. The true nature of Aten is not the physical manifestation of the solar disk anymore, but the light emanating from that disk. The didactic names give us the identity of the Aten. We learn more about the Aten through hymns, such as the much celebrated Great Hymn to the Aten, and the so-called teachings of Akhenaten himself, most of which have not come down to us, which appear to have been perhaps even daily pronouncements by Akhenaten. Akhenaten could speak ex cathedra at Achet Aten for his god Aten. Much of Akhenaten's religion remains unexplained, both textually and visually, although there are numerous hints at the underlying theology of Amarna. The four most prominent features of Atenism tell us much of what we need to know. Akhenaten sets up a new capital. He introduces a new artistic style. He persecutes most other deities. And he gives a great importance to Queen Nefertiti and to royal daughters, with the very prominent absence of any male issue from his marriages, either with Nefertiti, the lesser wife Kia, or perhaps others. If you look at each of these features and their reflections in texts, in art, in architecture, we do find a common principle connecting these four aspects of Atenism, and that distinguish it from Egyptian theology before and after the reign of Akhenaten. All of these features point to an attempt to follow the living deification of Amenhotep III and live in a timeless world that recreates the beginning of the cosmos before divine differentiation. During his 5th regnal year, Amenhotep IV Akhenaten changed his own name and place of residence. He abandons Amenhotep for the name Akhenaten, one who is effective for the Aten. He seeks out a site for a new capital, to which he gives the name Achet Aten, horizon of the Aten. The art of Akhenaten, known to many, becomes truly bizarre. Oddly proportioned bodies and elongated skulls combine with what appears to be a unique sense of movement and a feel for momentary events. Bits of incense are caught in midair, dropping from the hand of a royal figure onto a flame atop a pile of offerings. At least some aspects of the Amarna style of art, however, have precedence in the type of representation introduced after the Jubilee Festival of Amenhotep III. The art of Amenhotep III falls into three major phases. Initially, it follows and develops slightly what we would call late Tutmosid art. It simply follows the artistic style of those who have gone before. Soon, a second, more mature Amenhotep III style appears. Very highly refined, polished artistic production, probably surpassing most of what comes before it in terms of the feeling for proportions of figures and the fluidity of long, continuous lines, an opulent, polished art for an opulent, polished court. About the time of the first Jubilee, Amenhotep III introduces a new style of art alongside his mature, refined style. This new style reveals exaggerated forms of certain aspects of royal physiognomy, particularly the face. The royal portraiture of this Jubilee style gives the face of Amenhotep III the proportions of a baby's face, large almond-shaped eyes, a small nose, overall chubby features. This baby art with the large alien-looking eyes foreshadows that of Akhenaten in the extreme alterations to the royal figure. These new features coincide with the living deification of Amenhotep III during his first Jubilee celebration and show the king as the newborn baby son on earth. Amenhotep IV initially continues not that Jubilee style, but the mature, refined second phase of Amenhotep III. But this bizarre Amarna style of Akhenaten, the style introduced with the move to the capital city of Akhet-Aten near the modern village Amarna, this new style expands greatly on the final Jubilee style of Amenhotep III's art. The royal physiognomy in Amarna takes the form of spindly extremities, thickened thighs, pronounced buttocks and paunch, flabby unisex breasts, we might say, a long, elongated, drooping chin, an elongated skull. The style is contagious and spreads from Akhenaten and his family ultimately to the courtiers and residents of Amarna. One of the most notorious aspects of Akhenaten's reign, from the perspective of the ancient Egyptians at least, was the pogrom he begins against the cults of most Egyptian deities, particularly the imperial god Amun, who becomes anathema to Akhenaten and his disk-worshipping followers. At the time of Akhenaten's name change and the move to Akhet-Aten, the name and image of Amun are removed from temples and tombs and other monuments. On some monuments, Akhenaten's followers even hack out the word Necheru, gods, apparently so as not to offend the sole rule of Aten. The intensity of Akhenaten's attack on other gods is probably behind the change in the name of Aten that occurs during regnal year 9. In the second name of Aten, the divine names Ra-Horakti and Shu, light or luminous space, disappear, and the cartouches that are retained contain the formula, the living one, Re, ruler of the two horizons, who rejoices in the horizon in his name of Re, the Father, who comes from the sun disk. Only the sun and names of the sun as Re and Aten are now allowed. In Amarna art, women are very important. Akhenaten almost never appears without Nefertiti, and they together seldom appear without the ultimately 6 daughters that resulted from their marriage. Nefertiti may even appear performing rituals previously reserved for the king alone. Nefertiti, in a scene depicting the prow of the queen's riverine bark, actually appears smiting a female enemy. Nefertiti and Akhenaten become almost interchangeable mirror images of themselves. They can be surrounded by as many daughters as one likes, but a son never appears, even though we know from a surviving block at Hermopolis near Amarna, near Akhenaten, that the king actually had a son named Tutankhaten. But he is absent in the surviving Amarna art. Well, why are these features part of Akhenaten's religion? Why does he move his capital? Why does he show himself and his family and ultimately his followers in such a non-traditional, even grotesque way? Why does Akhenaten persecute other deities? Why is Nefertiti? Why are the daughters all so important? Why are Akhenaten and Nefertiti virtually mirror images one of the other? No current theory of Akhenaten's solar religion really provides a framework to explain these major features, but if one looks, the answer is not really that surprising after all. Look at where Amenhotep III built his new Jubilee city and his mortuary complex. His mortuary temple and Malkata surround Medinet Habu on the west bank at Thebes. We know that a temple had been built at Medinet Habu during the 11th dynasty. We don't know exactly to whom it was dedicated, and the earliest surviving texts that describe the gods of Medinet Habu are from a much later period, primarily from the Greco-Roman period. But what we do know from those inscriptions is that Medinet Habu was the site of the burial place of the Agdawad, 4 pairs of male-female deities who personify the basic elements of creation: darkness, the primordial waters, infinite space, hiddenness. These gods come to Thebes from elsewhere. They were brought in, apparently, at the foundation of the Middle Kingdom, perhaps by Mentuhotep II, transplanted from their place of origin at Hermopolis in Middle Egypt. Over time, Medinet Habu becomes the cult center of the Agdawad at Thebes. The site is even called Yat Chayumut, the mound of the mothers and the fathers, referring to those 4 male-female pairs who are the mothers and fathers of all creation. In later theology, the birthplace of the Agdawad was Hermopolis in Middle Egypt, and their burial place, the place whither they go into the primordial waters once they have completed their act of creation, their place of burial, of repose, is Medinet Habu. Apparently, Amenhotep III situated his mortuary temple and Jubilee complex to either side of Medinet Habu in order to associate himself with the place of these creative primordial gods, the Agdawad. Akhenaten, the new city of Akhenaten, is indeed located on land that Akhenaten goes out of his way to say did not belong to any other god. But it is very close to the actual city of Hermopolis, the old home base of the Agdawad. Amenhotep III builds his Jubilee city, his new city, near the Theban home of the Agdawad. Akhenaten builds his even grander new capital city near the original home of the Agdawad, near Hermopolis. Even the name of Akhenaten's new city, Horizon of the Aten, reflects connections with the constructions of Amenhotep III at Thebes. The name of a palace sanctuary of Amenhotep III at Thebes was Hay-im Achetni Aten, the one who rejoices in the horizon of Aten, probably located near the Temple of Karnak. In Akhenaten's early constructions, the name Achetni Aten, Horizon of the Aten, is equated with the name of Thebes. Akhenaten set out from the beginning to adopt this idea of city as horizon from his father. Rather than simply building even bigger at Thebes, rather than building even bigger close to the Theban home of the Agdawad, Akhenaten goes back to the original home of those primordial deities, back to a site near Hermopolis. Akhenaten's art shows an undifferentiated form. It isn't clear whether Akhenaten and Nefertiti really are male, female, or what. Akhenaten looks a little more male than female. Nefertiti appears a bit more female than male ultimately, but essentially both are androgynous. Since Akhenaten has moved to an area close to the home of the Agdawad, the best suggestion to explain the new Amarna art style is that Akhenaten and Nefertiti are androgynous because they represent the first male-female pairs, the Amarna counterparts of the Agdawad deities. The thighs, belly, and buttocks of the Atenus rulers are those of fecundity and pregnancy. The elongated skull is that of the newborn child just recently emerged through the birth canal. Even Akhenaten's oddly shaped navel resembles that of a woman after giving birth. Akhenaten is the newborn deity who already contains within himself the male-female elements of these androgynous gods at the beginning of time. The baby art of Amenhotep III, the baby sun god, now becomes the baby creator god at the beginning of time. We know from recent genetic tests on the body of Akhenaten, found in Tomb 55 in the Valley of the Kings, Akhenaten was not genetically deformed. Akhenaten's art does not represent a peculiarity of the appearance of Akhenaten, but a peculiarity of the religion of Akhenaten. Even in colossal statues, Akhenaten could appear without clearly differentiated genitalia. Akhenaten is the creator god who embodies both male and female elements because he is still part of this time of origin. With Nefertiti, he is the mostly male element of a mostly male-female pair that still belongs to this time of incomplete differentiation, the time of the Agdawad. Akhenaten and Nefertiti, in fact, appear in the roles of Shu and Tefnut, the first male-female pair in the myth, we might say, of creation at home at the city of Heliopolis, corresponding to the four male-female pairs in the origin story of Hermopolis. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are the incompletely differentiated first male-female elements at the beginning of time. Akhenaten persecutes other deities, then, not because he dislikes them, but because they cannot yet exist in his undifferentiated world. For the same reason, Akhenaten surrounds himself with his wife Nefertiti and his daughters. They are all female. They are feminine, like the rays of the sun, the Setut, like the hands, the Jerut of Aten. Akhenaten, surrounded by Nefertiti and his daughters, is the sun god surrounded by his rays and hands. But if a son were to appear, we would see the next generation coming into existence. And indeed, this does not happen for Akhenaten. Akhenaten is playing out an eternal recreation of the sun. We even know at Akhet-Aten, at his city, Akhenaten appears to have spent the night in the northern riverside palace at the far northern edge of Akhet-Aten, and each morning he would ride on his chariot with Nefertiti into the center of his city, coming out of the northern palace, riding into the horizon of the sun disk, doing his daily duties, and then riding back out in the evening. He actually rides into his horizon as the sun god comes out of the horizon each morning and goes back each evening. Akhenaten, in his daily commute into his city, is performing a daily jubilee ritual. Every day is a ritual day at Akhet-Aten. Unfortunately, for those living in the rest of the country, with the temples of the other deities closed, no day was a festival day. The economic disruptions caused by Akhenaten were horrific. At the death of Akhenaten, an ephemeral ruler whose name appears alternately in male and female forms, Ankh-Khepru-Re Nefer-Neferu-Aten and Ankhet-Khepru-Re Nefer-Neferu-Aten, appears. This name is based on one of the names of Nefertiti, but changed slightly. Evidence suggests that the eldest daughter of Akhenaten, following the death of Akhenaten, assumed the role of king, adopting a name that is ambiguous as to gender. Ultimately, an additional name appears, a king Smenkhare, probably the husband, at least for a short time, of this daughter Meritaten. These ephemeral kings are very seldom recognized, and in most modern literature, Smenkhare is an incredibly important character. People wonder about him all the time. In fact, he only appears once in a secondary scene in a tomb at Akhenaten, and his name appears a few times on small objects. Other than that, he's completely ephemeral. Some have suggested that he may be a Hittite ruler about whom we'll speak later, but that is completely unclear. Eventually, Tutankhamun comes to the throne, changing his name from the heretical Tutankhaten back to Tutankhamun, and reintroducing the rule and worship of Amun to Egypt. Tutankhamun dies at the age of 19, leading to a crisis in succession, since the only probable offspring of the king were two stillborn children buried in small coffins and found in the tomb of their father. Following the reign by an elderly courtier from Amarna, the man named Aya, ultimately General Horemhab, the general of Tutankhamun's armies, comes to the throne, bringing an end to the 18th Dynasty.
This ends Lecture 9.